Good evening, dear listeners. Oops, wrong podcast. Welcome to Talking Till Dawn, where we explore cases of the strange, the uncanny, and the bizarre. I'm Michael Whitehouse, and I'm joined by the always irrepressible Mr. Martin Yates.
Hello, how you doing?
I'm good, mate. I'm good. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. Just having a routine January. A few chilly winter walks, a few wasted days sitting in the house when I should be out living my best life. A lot of days spent sitting in work wondering what the hell the point is. You know, nothing interesting to report, really.
The existential dread of January.
Yeah, just background level existential dread. Nothing.
Sometimes sitting in the house is you living your best life. That's honestly, I'm telling you, sometimes sitting down in your house is your best life.
When you're 90.
Yeah, okay. Maybe I just like sitting. Before we begin with tonight's episode, I just wanted to thank those who have already reviewed the show on their podcast app of choice. Thanks to every one of you. If you haven't already, please do consider reviewing the show, as it really does help us spread the word.
Definitely.
And we've also surpassed 1,000 downloads, Martin.
We did. I saw that. I was going to buy some fireworks, but I didn't think that would translate very well over an audio medium, so you just have to make do with me saying thanks, guys.
Beautiful. So thank you very much to all of our dear listeners. So, okay, settle in. Martin, do you have a drink?
I've finished it, but it's okay, on you go.
Just lie to them. Just tell them you've got a drink.
Oh, yes, Michael. Glug, glug.
Are you ready to delve into one of the strangest and most unnerving cases so far on the podcast?
Always down for a bit of delving.
Then I'll begin. Tonight we're exploring strange encounters with black-eyed children. Are they cryptids? Are they aliens? Are they children? Let's try and find out. Okay, Martin, I want to take you back to the year 2000.
Okay.
20 years ago. I can't believe it's 20 years ago. The year 2000 still sounds like something from a science fiction movie. But in any case, I'm taking you now to the summer of 2000.
Summer of love.
Where a young, fresh-faced 19-year-old is walking through a park in the south side of Glasgow.
Oh, really?
It's 1 a.m, the sun has set, and the park is now populated by the dark looming shapes of the trees all around.
Okay.
This man, we'll call him Michael Whitehouse, because, well, it's me. He's accompanied by two of his closest friends, Mark and Chris. At that time, I was working in nightclubs, and Mark and Chris were doing likewise. Mm-hmm. So for that reason, we didn't really meet up at the weekends. We would meet up during the week on our nights off.
Okay.
Mark lived in a house actually inside the park, his family having bought it from someone who used to tend the gardens there. The place is called Queen's Park and still stands. I think we may have even mentioned Queen's Park in another podcast episode.
We mentioned Queen's Park on the Elmer McCurdy episode because Queen's Park was the name of a theme park where his corpse was displayed at one point.
Excellent. I wasn't sure. I couldn't quite remember, but I knew we'd mentioned it. So it's winding paths, boating ponds, woodland and rolling hills look down over all of Glasgow City, and its history goes back to the 17th century. In any case, my friend Mark lived in the park.
Did you get much mileage out of that at the time?
Oh, aye, all the time. Chris and I would go to Mark's house on these weeknights. One of our favourite things to do would be to take Mark's dog for a walk late at night through the park when no one else was around. On this particular night at 1 a.m, we were all walking down a path we didn't normally use. I'm not exactly sure who suggested it, but the path cut through a section of the wood and was pretty secluded. It was flanked on both sides by trees and large bushes. As usual, we were in good spirits, probably not entirely sober, and our laughter was the only thing that could be heard in the park that night. That was until we heard a rustling sound.
Oh, God.
It was coming from one of the large bushes to the side of us. We couldn't see all that well, as the park lights were pretty obscured by the trees nearby, and we stopped and wondered what it was. Probably a fox or a cat, maybe even a deer, though the park isn't all that big. Suddenly, a pale face emerged from the bushes. Bizarrely, it was a child, a young boy, no older than 8 or 9. Now let me remind you, this is 1 a.m. in the morning on a weeknight. This boy steps out of the bushes onto the path next to us. I think for a moment we wondered if we were seeing things because it was just such an odd, unnerving thing to happen. But then the boy started talking to us and we had a conversation with him. I asked him if he was okay and he said he was fine. I told him that a child his age shouldn't be wandering around Queen's Park at night.
All right, Grandad.
On my mind was the fact that there had, not too long before, there had been a murder in the park.
Oof.
The boy then raised his hand and with one finger pointed to the bush he'd just emerged from. He said, "I've left my football in there. Can one of you help me find it?" You hear about the hairs going up in the back of your neck, and that was definitely the sensation I experienced at that moment. It was like everything was telling me this situation was wrong, and not just that, but even dangerous. The boy then said, "My ball is just in here, come and help me get it." He then walked back into the bushes. Now, we all stared at each other, and there was no way any of us were going into that bush. I could hear leaves rustling and something moving in there. What we did is we phoned the police and said we'd just encountered a young boy in the park at that time of night, and we waited there nearby. But it sounded like whoever was in the bushes had moved off into the woods. And
So you think he wasn't alone in there? You think that was an ambush of some kind?
Possibly, and we'll definitely get to that. But so I heard more rustling in the woods, and then whoever was there, it sounded as if they'd headed off into the woods and maybe onto the other side of the park.
That's a fucking weird thing.
You see, tonight's episode is all about the unnerving encounters with strange children some have labelled black-eyed kids, and in reading many of the reports on this, it brought back that night perfectly. How unsettling something like that can be, to encounter a young child out in the dark, a place where they shouldn't be. Of course, the black-eyed children encounters suggest that some of these children are not what they seem.
So, I vaguely recall you telling me this story before, not in this context.
I may have mentioned it on a live stream.
Maybe that was...
I may have mentioned it on a live stream.
So, are you saying you think that might have been one of the... Sorry, this isn't something I know a great deal about, but are you saying this is something that could have been a black-eyed children encounter? You think that might have been something...
No, looking at all of these... Been researching this episode for a while now.
Yeah.
And looking at all of the different cases, and there's thousands of them.
Yeah.
That it reminded me of that night.
Sure.
That night's always stayed in my head as something really, really unusual.
Because it's so incongruous, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just...
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, there were other parts of that experience that were kind of in line with some of the things that people have talked about when they've encountered this. Now, we will get back to that night as we go on, but I wanted to put that experience up front as, you know, this is one of the things that I've come to as I've been reading all this stuff, that, my God, that was actually quite similar to what some of these people were saying experienced. Not exact, but similar.
Yeah. Interesting.
Back in 1996, Brian Bethel was a local journalist in Abilene, Texas. Since then, he has served as the senior staff writer for the Abilene Reporter News, and has also had articles published in the Houston Chronicle, the Miami Herald, the Charlotte Observer, and San Antonio Express, which I really like because I'm a big fan of the film The Fog, and San Antonio Bay is the name of the town. But anyway, so Brian Bethel's he's written for a number of other print publications and other news stations as a journalist. In 1998, Brian shared a terrifying experience he had kept to himself since it had happened 2 years earlier. He shared this information with an email discussion group, and his encounter kind of goes along these lines. One night at around 10 p.m, Brian was sitting in his car in an empty car park outside of a cinema. He had remembered that he needed to pay something by cheque, and so he took out his chequebook and began filling it out, intending to put it in a drop box on his way home. While he was engrossed in writing the cheque, he hadn't noticed something odd. He was not alone. When a tap came at the driver's side window, Brian was startled. Staring through the glass at him were two young boys. One was slightly older than the other, though in Brian's original email he states that both children were, and I quote, in that semi-mystical stage of life children get into where you can't exactly tell their age. Both were boys, and my initial impression is that they were somewhere between 10 and 14.
Okay.
From here in, Brian refers to the older boy as boy number 1 and the younger as boy number 2, though he states that boy number 2 never spoke throughout the entire encounter. Boy number 1 was slightly taller with medium-length brown hair, and Brian said that he had an air of confidence about him. Boy number 2 was paler with red hair, and he seemed suspicious. He was looking around nervously as the encounter unfolded. At this point, Brian said he experienced a strange feeling of dread that was completely disproportionate to simply being faced with 2 children. Obviously not a father, Brian. He described the unusual feeling as an overwhelming sense of fear and unearthliness. When the older of the 2 boys smiled through the glass at him, Brian's sense of fear increased. Instinctively, he knew something was not right, but he didn't know what it was at that point. Brian rolled his window down half an inch and asked them what they wanted, which, by the way, it doesn't matter. If it's nighttime and someone taps on my window,
Yeah.
I'm rolling it down an inch. If that.
Yeah, especially if you're sitting in a dark car park.
Yeah, 100%, because I've heard too many horror stories and read too many horror stories.
You can speak through the glass.
Yeah. Is that what you would say to them?
Yeah.
Just loudly speak through the glass.
Shout into the exhaust pipe.
This is what Brian wrote about their interaction when boy number 1 started talking. "Hey mister, what's up? We have a problem," he said. His voice was that of a young man, but his diction, quiet, calm, and something I still couldn't put my finger on, made my desire to flee even greater. "You see, my friend and I want to see the films, but we forgot our money," he continued. "We need to go to our house to get it. Want to help us out?" Immediately for me, I don't know about you, Martin, but the alarm bells would be ringing at that point.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a very, very strange... Even if you put the supernatural and the bizarre to the side.
Oh, absolutely. And it sounds a lot like your experience, actually. My initial feeling would be, this is like a trap of some kind.
Yeah.
These 2 kids are not the only people here. That would be my thought.
Yeah, Chris Hansen's round the corner with a film crew.
It wasn't what I was thinking, but yeah, a honey trap.
Yeah. So Brian writes that he had interviewed many children as a journalist, and the way this boy spoke seemed strange. Boy number 2 looked shocked because Brian didn't immediately let them into his car. The older boy continued to try to persuade Brian, saying, "Come on, mister, now we just want to go to our house, and we're just 2 little boys." At that point, Brian writes that something was wrong about the tone and voice of boy number 1.
No child says we're just little boys. That sounds like an adult speaking.
Yeah.
Or a script fed to a child to speak.
Yeah.
From an adult, or something that isn't a child anyway.
Like one of those people that go to high school and they're really 36.
When my little sister was a kid, she used to buy one of those, you know, those little girls' magazines that's all full of like bunnies and pictures of cute cats, and magazines aimed at young girls who haven't got to the stage of fancying pop stars yet.
Yeah.
I can't remember what it was called, but it was one of these, you know, it's got comics and stuff in it aimed at girls. One section of this was like a pen pal section. And you could write away, and they would link you up with another reader of the magazine. And in theory, these 2 little girls were supposed to send letters back and forth. And she started doing this, and she was writing to a little girl down in England somewhere. And I think my mum just happened to look over her shoulder as she was reading the letter and writing a reply to it. This was obviously pen and paper.
Yeah.
I think that was before we even had the internet in the house.
Yeah.
And she just thought, there's something really weird about that handwriting. So she took the letter that this, quote, little girl had been writing my sister and was reading it. And it just read how a 40-year-old guy who'd never been around children would imagine a little girl would write. So it was all like, how are you? My mum got me like a new bikini with yellow spots on it.
Oh, God.
I am going to get a bunny with floppy ears. It was just weird. So Well, what my mum did was she wasn't sure it was a grown adult, but it just seemed that way. She got her to write something like, "My mum says you have very nice handwriting. It looks almost like an adult's."
Yeah.
Just to drop that into the conversation that A, her mother has read it, and that B, they have noticed that something's up. And the letter stopped.
Oh, man.
Boom. Stopped overnight. I think my mum reported it to the magazine.
Yeah.
I don't know if anything was done. But at that time, the level of checks and the level of protection that there is now just wasn't there. But just what you said there, when those kids were talking, and they were talking in a way that just didn't ring true as words that a child would spontaneously come out with, that just put me in mind of that situation. And that was something that sent chills up my spine. I would have been a teenager at the time, and it creeped me the hell out, and that's always stuck with me.
Oh, definitely. Unless it was a young girl who just get really, really defensive about people comment on her handwriting.
But it was yeah, that's true. But it was.
I just want people to think of me as a wee girl, but they see my handwriting, they think I'm a 40-year-old.
Yeah, I can't help it. I'm a 40-year-old man's handwriting.
That is really creepy, though.
It was definitely a guy. It was definitely a pedo.
Yeah.
I'm almost certain of it.
Awful.
From what I remember, although nothing outright untoward was written in the letters, it read like he was gearing up to maybe share pictures.
Yeah.
You know, all this talk of, I'm getting a bunny, so maybe I'll take a picture of the bunny and send it. Could you send me a picture of your pets? Oh, what do you look like? Here's a picture of me, and then pull some picture of a little girl out of his weirdo collection.
Oh my god.
And then it felt like he was laying the groundwork. So he made those comments about, I'm going on holiday, I've got this new bikini. It was almost like he was maybe down the line going to be, oh, what is yours? You know, and open that kind of line of, just thinking about it makes me...
I just need to write this down, Martin, for my daughter. No pen pals. Right, okay.
But it just, even remembering that just makes me feel really grubby. So even without the potential sexual aspect of that, there was just something about a supposed child spouting this false, badly written dialogue that was supposed to be a child. There was something just uncanny and weird about it, which I think is the same in this story you're describing about the children in the car park. But anyway, continue.
Yeah, no, definitely. It sounds like a similar thing where the language just seems stilted. So Brian wrote that he noticed something wrong about the tone and voice of boy number 1. There was another exchange until the older boy said, "Come on, mister, let us in. We can't get in your car until you do, you know." The spokesman said soothingly, "Just let us in and we'll be gone before you know it. We'll go to our mother's house." That's the bit that creeped me out. We'll go to our mother's house.
Yeah, let us in. You've got to invite us in. I've heard that before.
Yeah, definitely. Brian was shocked to realise that his hand was on the door handle and that he was about to let the strange children into his car, almost as if he were in a trance. This is when Brian saw that the children's eyes had turned jet black, no iris or pupil. The older child then said, "Come on, mister. We won't hurt you. You have to let us in. We don't have a gun." Overcome with fear, Brian panicked, and as he moved his hand to start the car, the boy grew angry, saying, "We can't come in unless you tell us it's okay. Let us in." Brian sped away, and looking back, he saw no sign of the two children, as if they had completely vanished. After sending this account to the mailing list, Brian eventually shares a subsequent chat log containing a conversation with someone he knows online, a man named John, who states that he had a similar encounter. In John's experience, he was in his car at night in Portland, Oregon, on the 3rd floor of an above-ground garage. He had been attending a conference in the building when he saw someone he knew come up to his car. The man, named Doug, asked if he could get in and asked John to drive around for a while. When John asked why, Doug said that there were some creepy children hanging around next to his car and he didn't feel right about them. Doug got in and then John drove by Doug's car, and when he did, he saw 3 children, just as his friend had said, standing there. When John slowed down, the kids approached and John asked them why they were hanging around his friend's car. One of the children spoke, saying, "It's scary out there all alone, and we just wanted a ride home." The eldest child then said, "You promised you'd help us out." Doug answered, "I don't even know you." Bizarrely, Doug suddenly said he was getting out of the car, and John told him to stay put. In John's view, there was something deeply wrong about the children standing there. When John stopped Doug from leaving the car, he said that the children's faces momentarily changed as though they looked much older. Now, this all sounds to me, if anyone's seen, and I think I mentioned this later in the notes that I've got, but if anyone's seen Let the Right One In,
yeah,
or read the book, or, I mean, there's an American version and there's the original version. Was it Swedish? Was that?
One of those, yeah.
Yeah, one of those. That's not very nice. Yeah, it was definitely that area of the world, but this sounds like something out of this, but I can verify that this came before the book, years before the book came out, and years before the films came out.
I will say, and I know next to nothing about this subject, at least until you told me we were going to be talking about it, and I briefly had a look at the Wikipedia page. I don't know a great deal about it, so I'm learning most of this from you for the first time. But it does smack to me slightly of a creative writing project, a little bit. There are some elements to it that, and it may just be that in retrospect, in trying to piece together the events, they're put together in a narrative way because the guy is a journalist and he has a flair for that. But there's something about the pacing and the way he drops in the spooky details that just feels like fiction somehow. But I don't want to dismiss it, but I'm just saying that strikes me as one explanation for this.
Absolutely, mate, absolutely. And we will get to all of that in time. So John noticed at this point that the children's faces momentarily changed as though they looked much older. Then John noticed that their eyes were now a deep black. At this sight, John sped away, frightened. The children started chasing the car, and at this point John was filled with the feeling that if the kids reached the car, he and Doug would both be killed. Didn't know why he felt that, but that's how he felt. Saying that, if you'd seen kids with black eyes coming up to your window like that, maybe you would think you're a goner. Just a few moments later, John and his friend reached the ground floor and saw the oldest of the children standing there waiting for them. Somehow the boy had beaten them there.
Like Daffy Duck?
Yeah, he almost reached John's car door, but the car was moving too fast and they made it out into the street. When they left the building, John realised Doug had passed out in the passenger seat, and when he looked back at the building, there was no sign of any of the kids. What John described as a feeling of menace left him at that point, and he felt safe. 10 minutes later, and this is a bit bizarre to me, but 10 minutes later they drove past the garage, and again the feeling of menace that seemed to emanate from the children did not present itself.
Right.
When they entered the building to get to Doug's car, there was no one around. This is when Doug confessed that he had indeed given one of the children a lift in his car earlier in the night, and that he had said to them that he would take him home, but when the other children appeared, he had a bad feeling about it.
Did Doug say why he gave the kid a ride in his car?
No, there's nothing there. I mean, it sounds strange, right?
It does, yeah.
Yeah, so Doug drove off in his car, and John followed in his. And after driving for a few minutes, John suddenly felt the same feeling of menace and dread that he had experienced before. And at that point, just in front of him, Doug drove through a yellow light, misjudging an intersection, and was hit by a truck. And he died in the crash.
Oh shit. So wait, sorry, is this the same night?
This is the same night, yeah.
Okay.
They've went back to where Doug's car was parked. Doug's got in his car, and John's followed in his. Okay. So Doug's been driving in front of him.
So is this a verifiable event then? If he...
We'll get to that as well.
Right, okay.
I don't know. Maybe it is verifiable. Maybe there would be a way to verify it. But certainly this all comes... This is why it comes down to being problematic in some ways. This comes down to sort of chat logs.
Yeah.
And emails from the mid to late 90s.
Sure, yeah.
So this is everything that's in this conversation between John and Brian, who'd had the earlier encounter.
And this conversation, these chat logs, this, you're saying, goes back to the beginning of the Black Eyed Kids legend, essentially, at least as it exists on the internet.
This is how, I probably should have said that earlier on, but this is how the Black Eyed Kids legend kind of began in a lot of ways.
Okay.
So After Doug died in that crash, when emergency services appeared on the scene, John gave a statement to the police about what he had seen happen.
Mm-hmm.
And while he was standing there, he felt under threat by something nearby. When John got back in his car, he saw the same kids once again, just 2 blocks from the accident.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't look as pale or as skinny as they had done earlier. John was then worried because he had to return to the same building for another seminar and wouldn't be leaving until after 9 p.m. on another day. At the end of the transcript, Brian later left his thoughts on a website, which I'll just read verbatim as it's a short couple of paragraphs. This was at the put at the end of these chat logs. I've been haunted, no pun intended, by this story ever since I decided to share it. Rather than the ridicule I expected, it seems that it touches some sort of strange primal chord in people. I've been trying, of course, to move beyond and forget these events, but inevitably something comes along to remind me of it. Apparently, I've become something of an urban legend. I have people ask me all the time on the net, hey, did you read the ghost story about the guy who saw the black-eyed kids who wanted to get in his car? Yeah, that was me. Really? Cool? Not exactly. And that's something I can't seem to get the point across about. This was not cool. It was not just like being in a Stephen King novel or any of the other inane comments that sometimes go along with it. It was real, though sometimes it made me feel crazy. And now I have a report from someone I trust that an extremely similar event has occurred and even resulted in the death of someone, at least indirectly. In a word, help. I need thoughts, I need ideas, I need to calm down. But beyond that, I just want to know what people think about this. I protected myself in my own manner. I am not worried about any danger to me, but this is too close to what I experienced to be mere coincidence. Your thoughts are welcomed, Brian. That sounds like he's saying your thoughts are welcome, Brian. He just signed it, Brian. So I was able to get all of that using, we've talked about this before, using the Wayback Machine.
Was this on Usenet or something?
I think what it was, I'll get to the source of it in a minute, but the version on the Wayback Machine was on another website, but it does go back to the early 2000s, and the story itself, there are reports about it earlier than that. Mm-hmm. And there was even some people have talked about the fact that he maybe wrote an article about it for one of the newspapers that he wrote for.
Oh, right.
But I couldn't find it. There were links to it from older articles about the Black-Eyed Kids phenomenon, and it linked back to the Abilene Reporter, but it just said that the page was no longer there.
Huh.
From here on in, these 2 stories, Brian and John's, get shared around and others start to come forward with similar encounters. This is how the Black-Eyed Kids mythos begins.
Right.
Though for over a decade the stories remain relatively obscure. It isn't until 2013 that there's a video posted on MSN about Black-Eyed Kids as a sort of cryptid creature.
Right.
After that, the story goes viral, and there have been books written about them, a film was made, and there is even a subreddit dedicated to the phenomenon. So there are now literally hundreds of alleged cases of encounters, perhaps thousands, and we'll get to explanations shortly, but I just wanted to quickly go through some more of the most unnerving ones that came after.
Yeah, this is what we're here for. Come on.
Hit me. Get to the meat and potatoes that happened after Brian and John's initial encounters. So a user who wished to remain anonymous shared the story with, and this should probably raise flags, but with Mysterious Universe in 2018. He was driving through Utah in the US and was surrounded by an expanse of desert. Feeling tired, he decided to pull over on a remote stretch of road to take a break. While he was resting in the car, he suddenly saw 2 young children walk out of the desert in the dark and up to the driver's door. The boy and girl were dressed strangely as though they were wearing clothes from another era. Concerned for their safety, the driver asked if they needed help. At this point, he suddenly experienced the same sense of dread reported in other Black-Eyed Kids encounters, and noticed that their eyes were jet black and that their skin was so pale that it almost gave off a very subtle glow in the darkness.
Mm-hmm.
The driver felt paralysed at this point. Something was stopping him from moving his body. When he finally managed to move slightly, the edge of his arm moved through the open window. When that happened, one of the children leaped forward and grabbed hold of the driver's arm. The boy smiled and his teeth glistened in the dark, looking almost metallic. He was then able to move and fight back, so he pushed the child off of his arm and started up his car. The boy had moved to the front of the car in the blink of an eye and stood his ground. Terrified, the driver drove forward and the child bounced off the front of the car.
Fucking hell.
When the driver
Better hope these are supernatural monsters.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something that I've thought about as well. But when the driver looked back, the boy was just dusting himself off uninjured.
That's what you would say.
There are many similar accounts that have been posted online, and they all have the same structure. 2 or 3 children appearing at a location or vehicle asking to be let in. You might be wondering then what would happen if you did let them inside.
You took the words out of my mouth.
Well, there are some accounts of that happening as well. One that stood out to me was a story that was posted to Mysterious Universe and before that to Week in Weird. It involved a woman from a quiet rural town in Vermont. She emailed her encounter to Week in Weird, wishing to stay anonymous. So one night in 2015, she awoke at 2:15 a.m. to the sound of someone knocking on her front door. This was especially alarming as she lived in a relatively remote location. Initially thinking that the knocking was probably from someone stuck on a dirt road near her home because the area was caught in the grips of a snowstorm, she got out of bed, and when she looked out of her window, she could see that the security light had been activated and that there were footprints in the snow leading up to her home. But she couldn't see any car out in the road, and from her vantage point she couldn't see if anyone was standing near the front door.
Yeah.
At this point, the woman woke her husband and both of them went downstairs to the front door to see if anyone was there. When they cautiously opened the door, they were shocked to see 2 children standing at the threshold. They were a boy and a girl, and both around 8 years old. Neither of them was dressed for such cold winter weather. Their hair was also cut in an older style, as if they had been wrenched straight out of another decade. Neither child looked directly at the woman or her husband. Instead, their heads were tilted downward, looking at the ground. That image sort of creeped me out a little bit when I was reading about this stuff. You know, like...
No eye contact.
Yeah, but them just looking down at the ground, just with their heads bowed slightly.
Yeah, that is very eerie.
Yeah. The woman was unnerved because she felt she would normally have brought the children inside immediately, but she experienced a strange fear rising up inside of her that stopped her from inviting them into her home.
You can stand in the vestibule, but don't come any closer.
Yeah, I know. Actually, that reminds me of, I had a terrible accident when I was 7 years old. My fingers were crushed badly and I ended up in a stranger's car. It was one of the kids, I didn't know them, but it was their mum, and we ran up this street and my fingers were mush.
Oof.
Oh, I still think of it, it's terrible. I always remember her driving me in the back of the car and blood's gushing from both my hands, and and she's just going, "Don't get blood in the car, don't get blood in the car."
It's like a song.
Yeah. Yeah, so in this case the woman felt that it was strange that she didn't want to just immediately invite them in, considering the situation where it was so cold outside.
She felt her own reaction was strange, you mean?
Yeah, she mentioned being repulsed by the sight of the 2 children. When the woman asked both children where their parents were, they answered by saying, "They'll be here soon." The woman and her husband didn't want to bring them inside, but eventually their concern for the children, who they believed had probably got lost in the woods, eventually overcame their apprehension, and they did eventually invite the children inside and made them something hot to drink.
Garlic milkshake.
Yeah, I know. Once you invite people in, it renders you powerless, Martin, you should know that. Whenever the couple tried to ask the children who they were or where they came from, they gave the same answer: "Our parents will be here soon." At that point, the woman began to notice how unconcerned the children were with being in a stranger's home. On top of this, she owned several cats and they were usually fine with strangers. However, At this time, they were agitated and they were trying to look for hiding places around the house. And when the woman tried to pat one of her cats, it hissed at her, which was really unusual. After leaving the room for a time, the woman walked back into the living room and found the two children sitting on her couch as still as statues. Her husband was also sitting down, but he was holding his head with his hands. He said he felt dizzy. The woman then decided to make everyone some cocoa, but when she turned to the children, she froze. They were looking at her and their eyes were as black as coal. The children then went to the bathroom, as you do. Panicked, the woman asked her husband if he had noticed their eyes, and he said they looked like his brother had after a car accident when his eyes were all bruised. As they spoke, the husband suddenly developed a nosebleed, something which the woman stated had never happened before. While the woman went to get some tissues for her husband, the power to the house suddenly cut out, leaving them in darkness. At that point, it's every man for themselves, surely.
Yeah, you grab something and start swinging.
Give her husband another black eye. Running back to the living room where her husband was, she was stopped in the hallway. The two children were standing there in the darkness, looking at her. Then they said, "Our parents are here." They then walked out of the house into the snowstorm, and the women saw them walk towards a car on the road outside, with two tall men dressed in black standing next to them. When they drove away, the power to the house soon came back on.
Like a Men in Black kind of thing.
Yeah, that jumped into my head as well. It was sort of unusual. I thought as well the whole nosebleed thing is reminiscent to some people's supposed encounters with aliens.
There are accounts of encounters with Men in Black where the Men in Black have black eyes.
Really?
I've certainly seen artists' impressions of it. I can picture the image of a man in black in a suit with black eyes in one of these like kooky UFO books I would have been given as a kid.
Yeah.
I'd need to look and see if I've still got that.
Unfortunately for the woman and her husband, that was not the end of the encounter. In the next 3 months, 3 of their cats vanished, and a 4th was discovered in a pool of its own blood inside the house. Apparently, it died from a massive internal hemorrhage. Soon after, the woman's husband continued to have the nosebleeds that first started when they encountered the black-eyed children, developing nausea and dizziness on top of this. The woman herself felt that her own health was deteriorating also. Fearing that others would be affected in the same way, she decided to share her story anonymously through several newspapers. She did share the story with some locals who stated that the children were Mennonite children. Have you heard that term before, Mark?
Yeah, they're like the Quakers, or they're not the Quakers, but they're another sect.
Yeah, I hadn't heard this term before, but so I looked it up, and apparently Mennonite kids are from a number of Christian churches, some of which promote living disconnected from modern life.
Yeah. Or
living as simple a life as possible.
Yeah.
But the woman states that she knows there was something else about those children, something evil. I could go on with other encounters, and maybe we'll do a part 2 at some point down the road if we can find an interesting lens to explore it through.
I think obviously your mental state at the beginning of an encounter with someone or something colours how you view the whole thing. So in a lot of these stories, if they're not made up, they all seem to begin with they had this sense of dread at the beginning.
Yeah.
Now, there's a question there of chicken and the egg. Is it that these kids are somehow instilling them with this primal sense of dread, or is it that sometimes we feel emotions or we feel frightened or we enter mental states and we don't exactly know why, and it's purely chemical or something else is bothering us? And if you were to enter like a negative mental state and then meet someone, you're almost like predisposed to find things that are scary or creepy or unsettling, especially when they approach unexpectedly in the middle of the night. When they let these kids in, okay, these kids are saying weird things and they're behaving in weird ways and they think they see that they've got black eyes. But kids are weird. Kids behave in ways that, especially if you don't have kids of your own, that seem completely nonsensical and bizarre. Especially if these kids are like of a certain religious sect that remain separated from the rest of society. They might have different mannerisms and things. I'm not saying that explains everything to do with the story. Of course it doesn't. But
it's also the fact that when they were saying why wouldn't they question being in a stranger's house, and maybe they've been brought up to just totally respect adults as authority figures.
They may be grown up in lots of different people's houses, and you just show up at people's houses and you can walk right in. So, I'm not saying that doesn't explain the dead cats, that doesn't explain the black eyes, but maybe, for example, if someone had this really, really weird encounter and it happened years ago, and then you read about black-eyed children and you start to think, was there something with their eyes? Because that fits so well. Was there something? I think there might have been something. You start to... You can imagine how you might start to convince yourself that these details... Again, I'm not saying that solves it, but that's just something to bear in mind when we think about these stories, that these are second and third and fourth hand stories of things that have happened a long time ago,
Yeah. I have no doubt that that's a massive part of what's going on. I mean, there are now thousands of these encounters shared regularly online. There's an active subreddit as well, where people are constantly posting these things. So much so, in fact, that the black-eyed kids phenomenon is it's been abbreviated to BEK, B-E-K.
Like the musician.
Yeah, that some people with an interest in the paranormal, they take it seriously. They take it as a sort of more recent paranormal or unexplained phenomenon that's happening now around us.
Yeah.
But can we take any of it seriously? So let's look at some possible explanations for all of this, and we'll start with the speculative ones. Do you have your speculative hat on, Martin?
I've got my speculative specs on, Mike.
The speculators. That's, if we're ever going to rebrand the podcast, we'll call it the speculators.
Oh, shit. I can't believe we blew it so bad. We should have called ourselves the speculators.
The speculators.
God damn it. If I ever have to get glasses, they're definitely getting called the speculators. Have you seen my speculators?
I know. I'm just wearing the old speculators. Many claim that these stories are much older and predate Brian Bethel's encounter by several decades. However, I think we can go much further than that. We can go back much further than that. Folklore is filled with unusual encounters with strange children. Some of these were known as fae children, which could be a podcast episode on its own, probably will be. And these legends and encounters, which I know you're familiar with, Martin, but people claim that their children had been swapped with a fae child, something that looked human but was not. At some point, the fairy folk sometimes, or some approximation of them, later return for the children and take them away to lands unknown. Are these black-eyed children something as old as that, a phenomenon that we have always encountered and interpreted at different times through the contemporary folklore of the time? Throughout the paranormal literature, there have been stories of ghostly children interacting with the living for thousands of years as well. In some of those accounts, the apparitions have a deformity of some kind. People have long believed that the eyes are the windows to the soul, and so stories of children and adults without eyes or black for eyes are representative of entities with no souls. Spectral shells of something that once lived wandering the remote places of the world.
Yeah.
And the roaming from house to house and vehicle to vehicle that we see in these black-eyed children, really trying hard not to say black-eyed peas. I've tried it for the entire time. Yeah. What about this roaming around? That we see this aspect of them as if they're just out there. There are many legends about a specific type of spirit called a wandering ghost that not only looks for a new place to live, but that can follow the living from one location all the way to their homes.
Yeah, something that you meet on the road.
Yeah. And lastly, Martin, alien vampires?
Alien vampires, I knew it was coming.
Are you interested in this?
Yes, I'm interested in alien vampires. I could feel the alien vampires rumbling towards us like a big boulder in the distance. But yes, let's hear about the alien vampires.
There's aspects of this that definitely echo some of the vampire mythology and also encounters with aliens. The let me in aspect of these encounters, where the children specifically say that they cannot enter a home or vehicle without being invited.
Classic vampires, isn't it?
Classic vampires. These cheeky vampires, what are they up to? Yeah, so it evokes the same idea found within vampire mythology. Traditionally, those creatures cannot enter the homes of the living without being invited.
Let us in,
Yeah.
let us in. That old chestnut, on
Aye.
your way,
Aye.
on your
Hold
way.
this crucifix first. And then there's the alien aspect. Throughout the 20th century, the image of the grey alien has dominated UFO and alien literature. These creatures are often much smaller and frailer than we are, which certainly makes them feel childlike in some instances. That and the fact that these grey aliens are often depicted with large black eyes, it's not too difficult to draw a connection. And there are also instances where people claim that there have been sort of human hybrids bred with aliens as well, and all of this sort of stuff, where people have actually seen the children and brought back to see them years later.
Yeah, these people that claim they've been abducted and then had sex with aliens, or they've had cells taken so that the aliens can then create alien-human hybrids. And yeah, it was not like a guy in South America who believed that he fathered hundreds of alien babies.
Randy Sod.
Yeah. But yeah, that's like again, it's folklore, but that's a big part of UFO folklore as well. But the thing about black eyes, obviously black eyes are an inherently scary thing, and I think the reason for that, we could go into the cliches of eyes are the windows to the soul and all of this.
I just did. You're just calling it a cliche. I just did.
Did you say that?
I just
sorry. You're not the first person probably to make that comparison, and probably that comparison lies at the bottom of a lot of things we see in fiction or in folklore, where things have glowing red eyes or scary eyes. Scary eyes are basically like shorthand. It's like in a movie, it's like, oh, there's something with weird eyes. You know it's going to be bad. Why? Because instinctively we look at that and go, I'm uneasy with this. And the reason for that is, especially with black eyes,
animals,
also with red eyes and things, it's because you can't see where they're looking.
Ah, that's a very good point. I thought you were going to say something about like predators.
Well, that as well, large eyes, and it probably does maybe on some level go back to that, but in the same way that clowns frighten people, at least I've heard it speculated by psychologists that clowns are frightening to people because they have a painted expression on their face, which makes it difficult to gauge what their real expression is. We're so used to being able to look at another human face and be able to judge a couple of things. One, are they angry? Are they sad? Are they murderously insane? We can usually gauge some information about the person's emotional state from looking at the face. However, if they've got a big fake smile painted on their face, that becomes more difficult. It's the same if somebody's wearing a mask.
That's fascinating.
The other thing that you can tell when you look at somebody's face, well, there's a whole aspect of things like with the skin and how sick, or some degree of information about the person's health. So pallor, paleness, or red, splotchy, mottled skin. You say this person's sick or diseased in some way. But the other main thing is, where is that person's attention focused? And obviously from a survival aspect, that's very important that we can tell that in other people. But if you look at someone and you cannot see, their eyes are just black, and you can't see if they're looking at you or if they're looking at someone else, or what they're looking at, that's information that's being deprived to us.
Yeah.
And that makes us uneasy. So there's definitely something fundamentally scary about a face with just black eyes that's all pupil.
Especially when we develop a theory of mind, and you're trying to gauge what other people are thinking. Yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
You're used to being able to kind of do that, and then if you've got no indicator of what they're thinking, probably why masks are scary for the same reason.
Exactly, yeah.
So are the black-eyed children people are encountering vampires, ghosts, aliens, or something much worse? Well, we can't rule any of that out. Sadly for me, I fall on the sceptical side of all of this, and let me tell you why. Let's go back to the source of all these stories, at least the modern ones. The email group Brian Bethel was part of when he shared his encounter with black-eyed children. This is an important point that, as far as I can see, it's been left out of almost every online retelling of Brian's story, whether it's an actual publication or video about it. The email group itself was part of a ghosts discussion group.
Okay.
In fact, Brian opens his email with the word ghosters, which I'm assuming is how the members of the email group referred to each other.
Yeah, I would think so.
Like, hey, ghosters.
Yeah.
Now, just because Brian was a member of a paranormal discussion email group doesn't mean that his story is false, but when most of the accounts of Brian's story use the fact that he was a journalist to add credence to his encounter, that's a road that goes both ways. And the people in that discussion group were talking about the paranormal regularly. Not only that, but about going on investigations. If it had been Brian contacting the group for help, it wouldn't have been so suspicious. But not only was Brian a part of the ghost discussion group, I have a sneaky suspicion he may have actually ran it or been a highly visible member. One of the reasons for this is that when using the Wayback Machine to get the earliest posting of his story, it was hosted on a website called the Ghosts Channel. And there's a copyright message at the end of the posted text itself in Brian's name. That doesn't mean he 100% ran that website, but it certainly implies the possibility. There are also some strange parts in the original email, for example. And like I say, this is always left out because people want to focus on the fact that he's a journalist and this gives him credence. But, you know, this was in his original email. I've explained this before, but for the benefit of any new lurkers out there, right before I experience something strange, there's a change in perception that comes about, which I describe in the above manner. It's basically enough time to know it's too late. This implies that Brian has posted previous emails about other types of paranormal encounters. The more encounters or evidence one person gathers, just incidentally encountering paranormal entities, the more suspicious you have to become.
I would like to see if there's any other surviving material from this early group. I would like to see what the prevailing tone of the work is, the prevailing tone of the conversation. Is this like a proto no sleep?
Yeah. That's the thing. As far as I can tell from all the chat logs and the emails that I've seen, it looks like it's probably an actual, I say proper, people are discussing the paranormal, but yeah, I think they're probably sharing experiences and looking to investigate things. And legitimate investigators spend decades looking for evidence and finding the smallest piece. That's all they find. They find something tiny, absolutely tiny, and they've spent 40 years investigating and they find one anomalous thing. When one person has so many profound experiences, Zach Baggins, you're left with the impression that they are either fantasizing about the events or there's some sort of self-delusion going on.
I've got a little bit of a bee in my bonnet about ghost investigators, and no offence if anyone listening here is a ghost investigator.
To be fair to them, they're obviously a while before that sort of craze really took off.
I think, when did Most Haunted start?
Most Haunted, yeah, but that was sort of in the UK, wasn't it? And Ghost Adventures probably was the early 2000s.
I'm pretty sure there were ghost investigators. I don't necessarily mean the TV series. I mean, look, there's a lot of different levels of seriousness in approaching the subject. Some people approach it very, very meticulously, and some people approach it very casually. But I think there's a sense where a lot of people go, yeah, I really fancy being a ghost investigator, and they watch these programs on TV and they see these guys going around with all these gadgets and going into spooky locations and getting scared, and they go, yeah, that's for me. And again, apologies if you are one of those people. I'm not necessarily talking about everyone here, but what I see a lot of the time from these people, especially the ones that post on YouTube, like some of the ones that we've looked at together now.
Sorry, I shouldn't laugh. I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, but if we shared those videos with our listeners, they would know that those ones that we're talking about are really ridiculous.
So a lot of these groups, they call themselves researchers, but they're not really performing research at all. They're going to a scary place. They've maybe got the gadgets, they've maybe got the gear. They're not executing a plan. They don't have a hypothesis. They don't have a particular thing that they're setting out to check. They don't have like a null hypothesis. They don't have any control.
There's no true scientific approach.
So they're basically just going in and arbitrarily waving gadgets about. There's no, if you were doing that scientifically, you would, for example, you might have two houses, one which has a ghostly reputation and one which doesn't. Maybe two teams. You don't tell either team which one really has the supposed ghost in it, and you send them in and you see if statistically there is actually any more activity in the supposedly haunted house than the not haunted house. And you would probably do things like set up instruments in specific places and leave them, don't touch them for the whole duration. Don't go waving things around and arbitrarily, pointing at a wall, pointing at a picture. You're testing specific areas against other areas and actually measuring the differences in the, you know, whatever it is you're measuring, electrical, whatever, you're looking at the differences, you get something to compare against, and you repeat that hundreds and hundreds of times. What a lot of these groups are doing, they're out for a spooky night out with their friends.
Yeah.
It's not research at all.
Yeah. I do think there's legitimate research in this area, and I do think that I personally, like, I've always been fascinated by sort of investigations into hauntings, and I would love us to explore that in some of the episodes. And there's some really interesting people who are very controversial, people like Harry Price, you know, that there are some paranormal investigators who have had a degree of respect, but then a degree of incredulity sort of as well. But it's a fascinating area, and I think there's good cause to at least look at these things. But you're totally right. People that are doing it by using a low light camera and just wandering around, that's fine, but it's not scientific, and they think it's scientific. And I think that's the biggest problem, is they don't know what scientific experimentation actually means and requires. Although it has to be said that Brian has also stuck to the same exact story for all these years, and states that on sharing his encounter publicly, that his career as a journalist met several roadblocks. He claims that the story has been an embarrassment, and that he is dedicated to revealing the truth and what happened, which he says is fact, even if it means... And I've watched, there's interviews with him and things like that on YouTube, and he does seem being honest about what he's saying, but that doesn't necessarily mean that what he's saying is true.
Yeah.
However, it's not just Brian's story that comes under scrutiny. Do you remember his friend John he spoke about in the car, and seeing his friend die in a crash shortly after?
Yeah.
Well, Brian claims that John was also a paranormal investigator.
Okay.
So none of that means it didn't happen, but if you already believe in the paranormal, and it seems that Brian and John do, especially when you immerse yourself in the stories of that world, you start to see the supernatural at play even when it isn't there. And
also, I think if this is bullshit, you can come to believe your own bullshit.
Absolutely.
For example, and I'm not saying this is what happened, but let's imagine that most of that story played out, but there were certain details that he embellished to make the story more interesting, or in the process of him converting it into text, it just got dramatised a little bit more. Let's say he added the black eyes or something like that. Again, I'm not saying that's what happened, but he is able to hold on to that core of the true story. You could be absolutely adamant that something happened and have a blind spot to how you have embellished the story, possibly.
Yeah, you become invested in your own history.
Yeah.
Emotionally.
Exactly. But there's a grey area between someone who is telling the truth and someone who is lying.
Yeah.
There is a grey area, and you can be in that grey area and not know that you're in that grey area, I think.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's what's happened here, but that's always something to bear in mind.
I believe that, and memories change over time as well. Like you say, they can be embellished and changed. Other more conventional explanations for these black-eyed children are, and it was brought up actually by Brian himself, was that the kids were wearing contact lenses and just playing a prank on the grown-ups. But I find this one less likely. I'm sure that sort of thing happens somewhere, but although John and Brian's email exchange did mention the fact that during John's encounter that the kids he saw looked, and I quote, weird, just freaky, you know, clothes and hair and makeup, gothomatic.
Right, so they could be fancy dressed, they could be goths, they could be, well, they're probably a bit young for that.
I've known people who are in those communities who have worn decorative contact lenses.
Yeah.
Although I'm not sure if these were easily available in the mid-90s.
They definitely were. They definitely. The goths' heyday was the 80s, man. Yeah. So they were definitely available.
So that's absolutely possible.
They used white contact lenses in The Evil Dead, which was 1980, so they were around.
Sclero lenses, was it?
Sclera is the white of your eye.
Yeah.
So a sclera lens is basically a lens that covers not just the iris, but the whole sclera.
Yeah, it's the whole thing.
So it's possible, but it'd be different if these were teenagers. I would be like, yeah, that's some mall goths hanging out in the car park. But these are young kids. You wouldn't put young kids in sclera lenses. If I remember rightly, when they were shooting The Evil Dead, they had white sclera lenses, and they had to take them off every 15 minutes and like bathe their eyes.
Yeah, they did, because no air gets them.
And tears couldn't lubricate the eye, and yeah, not nice.
At the start of tonight's discussion, I did not think we'd end up in The Evil Dead, but I'm delighted because I love that film.
But the other thing, Mike, that occurred to me, apologies if you're about to come to this, but there is a condition called aniridia.
Right.
Have you heard of this?
No.
So aniridia is a hereditary condition, but it can be caused by injury to the eye, although it wouldn't happen in both eyes in the case of injury unless...
It's not what David Bowie had, is it? Where you're...
No. That was, is it heterochromia or something like that? But aniridia is, just like it sounds, no iris. So that's where someone, either through injury or through genetics, has little to no iris tissue. So the iris is the part of your eye that gives it colour.
Mm-hmm.
People with aniridia have a whole host of problems because the iris is what controls the amount of light that comes into the eye. So people with aniridia look like they have black eyes. In terms of eye colour, they look like they have black eyes. Someone who looks like he has aniridia but doesn't. I actually thought he had aniridia for the longest time, and then I googled his name plus aniridia, and it turns out he doesn't have it. Is David Mitchell, the comedian David Mitchell from Peep Show?
God, that's right. He does have really, really large pupils.
He just has very, very dark brown eyes.
You're right.
It's unusual in someone with paler skin like he has.
So that's possible as well if you're in the dark.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. It could be someone with very, very dark...
But it's not though.
Irises or no irises at all. And yes, you're right. There's no white to the eye at all here. But in terms of being suddenly taken by surprise by someone with really startling eyes, and then down the line you hear these stories and you go, yes, I saw someone with black eyes, and you lose the bits that don't quite fit. So you can see how maybe meeting someone with aniridia would throw you off as well.
Yeah, although it's not going to explain thousands of people supposedly seeing these things, although I'll get to that in a second as well. Yeah, so as for the other encounters, it all comes across as a bit creepypasta. Speaking as someone who has written extensively within the creepypasta community, the black-eyed kids...
Takes a bullshitter to know a bullshitter.
Yeah, the black-eyed kids phenomenon feels very much like a modern urban legend, one people share to spook each other out. Most of the stories are anonymously posted, even when reported in the press, so it's difficult to verify anything. I would be very interested to read any police reports documenting a case if they exist.
That's the thing.
So if anyone knows anything about that, please do get in touch, because I would love to read something.
Yes, or CCTV footage or something.
Yeah.
I would love it to be true. Well, I would love it to be true until they show up at my door.
Exactly. And what about my own encounter I mentioned at the start of the podcast of the kid in the park at night? Well, maybe, just maybe he was a child, a real child. It's possible that some of these encounters have actually happened. And that the unnerving feeling people experience is because there really is danger near. There are several, you touched on this earlier, Martin, about the idea about you being in danger. There are several documented cases where serial killers, for example, have used their own children or a young person as bait to lull a victim into a false sense of security, because no one with a child could be a murderer. The night I encountered that young boy, we certainly felt that there was someone else there. However, we could have been wrong. Maybe he was just a kid whose parents didn't care enough about him to worry that he was out so late. Who knows the truth, but I do wonder about him.
It's just strange. So there's three of you, three big guys, right, walking up the road.
Yeah.
Who was in that bush? Was it Lou Ferrigno or something? What was he going to do with three strapping young guys?
Yeah.
One weirdo and a kid is not going to, overpower three big guys.
Unless he has a knife or something like that. And there were a lot of strange things going on in that park. It's got a bit of a history to it, but I do think that entire thing unnerved me, and it's always stayed with me because it was just such a strange thing.
You do see strange things in public places, quiet public places at night. When me and Callum were filming the documentary we did about Birkenhair, we did some filming in one of the cemeteries in Edinburgh's Old Town quite late at night. Well, about 9 or 10 at night. But in those cemeteries at 9 or 10 at night, especially at the time of year we were filming at, it was pitch black. It's still a very urban area, but there's not really anyone coming through those cemeteries. It's basically a big old crumbling graveyard. But there were still people walking about, doing lots of strange things around the graves at night, and Callum will back this up. And there was one really odd guy, and if you watch the documentary, there's a shot in it where I'm holding up a lantern with a candle in it, and I'm talking some nonsense about grave robbers or something. And while I'm doing that, I'm trying not to look to the left, because off to the left, I'm standing on a path, and there's an intersecting path roughly between me and Callum with the camera, and further up the intersecting path, just on the edge of the darkness, just beyond our lights, and just beyond the reach of the street lights, there's a kid, and I would say he was about 15 or 16, and he was just standing there. I don't even think he was looking at us, he was just standing there looking at the ground, and sometimes pacing back slightly and sometimes pacing forward slightly and then stopping. And I think probably, maybe this is somebody with mental health issues, could be somebody on the autistic spectrum.
Yeah.
But what was he doing there that night?
The black-eyed kid spectrum?
Could be. What the hell was he doing in the graveyard at night? What is his interest in graveyards that he comes and stands there alone? And I don't know, was he waiting for us to leave so he could do something that he didn't want us to see? I don't know. It was just really, really odd.
The mind boggles.
But you do see strange things.
Lovers of history, that's all it is.
Yeah, well, maybe. But the strange people do come out of the woodwork in these kinds of places at night. So it could just have been somebody with issues that you met. But it definitely is something that makes you uneasy, regardless of whether it is something...
It's out of the ordinary, and
whether it's something menacing or just something innocently weird,
Yeah. As with most of the things we discuss on Talking Till Dawn, we try to be open-minded, yet take a measured, critical approach to each subject. Most of the time, I like to leave the door open for the possibility that something paranormal really did happen. And maybe in the case of the black-eyed children, there is something there, but I do have my doubts on this one.
Slam that door, mate.
Still, the world's a strange place, and on this one I'm not quite willing to close the door on it completely, Martin. Let's leave it open ever so slightly, just in case.
Okay, just a crack.
Unless, of course, one of those children tries to slip through the gap.
Yeah, then we slam that shit. There's a whole kind of bestiary of these internet urban legend creatures, and I know they didn't all begin on the internet, but you've got stuff like the Dogman, which I think does go way back, but that's a favourite, especially right now on the internet for some reason. That seems to be in vogue. You've got Slenderman, you've got Shadow People, which is a big one as well online. But the one that I always really liked was the Black Stickman phenomenon.
I think I know what you're talking about.
There's not enough to this to actually make an episode on it, but I just wanted to give a shout out to the Black Stickman.
Yeah, is it in the back of videos?
The back of videos?
Well, I'm just thinking there are some videos where there's like something walking in the background.
Are you not thinking of the Fresno Nightcrawler, where it's like the little two-legged thing walking along the street?
No, there's an interview going on. It looks like there's this weird stickman-like thing just sort of wandering about in the background.
That wasn't what I mean, maybe that is part of the same thing. I'd just read about it on a website. There was some people sharing their stories of how, as children, they remembered meeting what looked like a child's drawing of a stickman, but actually alive, and would interact with them. And it's probably bullshit, but I just always thought that was a really cool
lollipop lady in it.
Weird creature. I'm gonna have to look up that video now. I just wanted to say before we go, thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for tuning in. We really, really do appreciate every listen, everyone who clicks subscribe. If you feel like you would like to help us out, the best thing you can do, if you've got even one friend who you think might be interested in listening to two weird guys talking about a lot of weird things, tell them about Talking Till Dawn. That is the hugest thing anyone could do for us. We would totally appreciate it. Tell people about the podcast. If everyone who listens told one friend, well, we're not a pyramid scheme, but you get the idea. That would be fantastic. Thanks so much for listening, guys.
I support that message. Please do share the podcast. And look at that, Martin. I think the sun is coming up.
The sun is coming up. And who's that at the front door?
2 children. Sleep tight, everyone, and be sure... what have I written here? Did I nod off at the end of writing? Sleep tight, everyone, and be sure you know who it is before you answer that knock on your door. See you in the next episode.
See you later.
His voice was that of a young man, but his diction...
Wondered what you were going to say there, right? There was a bit of a gap in the middle of that word that shouldn't have been there, mate. It shouldn't have been there. Sorry.
Okay, I'll start again.